Right, so hi, Amina, you're the only one here. Um, so hi. Um, I don't know if I should just like actually give some kind of spiel. It feels kind of weird in this context. I mean, I guess,
Um,
yeah,
I guess it's up to you, but I don't think it would be necessary. You can just jump
yeah.
right into it if you wanted to.
I mean, Amina, do you have any questions? Is there anything you'd like to hear about? It's just you. I can't hear you if you're talking. I can see you're unmuted though.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm a freshman now, deciding to major in political science,
Mhm.
and I just wanted to know how did you make that decision to major in political science when you were undergrad?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. The short answer is I failed out of two other programs first and didn't have a whole lot of options remaining to me. So good for you on not being in that situation. The longer answer is that I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad because I'm from Metro Detroit. And I was going to be a chemical engineer. That was the high school, you're good at math and science, you should be an engineer kind of thing. So I started in engineering school at Michigan and I did not like it. And I was not very good at it, probably because I did not like it. And it's hard to do hard things you don't like. And in the end of the first semester of my second year of college, I got a C- in organic chemistry, which honestly was really generous considering I don't think I learned anything all semester. That curve must have been really favorable. And so I would have had to retake the class, which I didn't want to do. So I decided to drop out of engineering school and I transferred to their version of CLA from the engineering school. Michigan has many fewer colleges than the U does. And so your options are kind of engineering or liberal arts. And liberal arts also has the sciences and math and everything. It's sort of, yeah. So I was in liberal arts for, well, so the semester I transferred, I didn't have a major. And I started taking all of my gen eds because I didn't have to take those in engineering. Engineering had its own separate set of gen eds. And then I decided to take a poli-sci class because I thought it was fun. I took some poli-sci as electives when I was in engineering school. And then family pressure and other sort of social pressures pushed me, or let's say encouraged me, if I'm being diplomatic, to decide to be an actuarial mathematics student. So I declared a major in actuarial mathematics, which for those of you who are not aware, which most people are not, is insurance math. It's basically doing all sorts of calculations to figure out when people are going to die so you can figure out how much money they have to pay for insurance. I did not like that either. And that had me taking classes on things like, I mean, I took a lot of math in that major because it was a math major, but I took classes on it was like literally classes on insurance math, financial math, that kind of thing. And then I think a year and a half into that, roughly, or maybe 1 year into that, I actually failed a statistics course. And like straight up failed. Like I think I was like 3/4 of the way through the semester. Michigan at the time, and maybe still, had like really strict rules about taking a W. So you could only do it like halfway through the semester. So I was like 3/4 of the way through the semester. I didn't understand anything. I was going to office hours all the time. I still didn't understand anything. And I calculated my grade and figured that even if I got a perfect score on everything else the rest of the semester, I was still going to get an F. So I emailed the professor and I said, I've just realized it's not possible for me to pass this class. I'm not coming anymore. Bye. And he responded and was like, you're right, that apparently it is not actually possible for you to pass this class. And so I, instead of going to the final, I took some extra shifts at Panera that semester. And I had done some work. When I transferred in from engineering, I got a research assistant job in the poli-sci department because somebody needed someone who had some computer programming background, which I'd had through engineering. Because basically they just didn't want to teach someone how to do the statistical software. So they were like, well, if you've done some programming, you can figure it out. And so that person had also, she's a grad student who had also been doing advising for poli-sci. And I called her up crying when I failed this class. I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. I just know I don't want to be in school for more than 4 years. This is very expensive. And she, I don't know how she had access to this, but she was able to go in and access my transcripts. She's gone at that point, and she figured out a way that I could graduate in poli-sci. So I never really chose poli-sci so much as I really just needed a degree I could complete in a year with the courses I'd already taken. And so she sort of like arranged everything so that I could just complete all my classes in 2 semesters and then graduate on time without having to do another summer. And so that's how I became a poli-sci major, was sort of process of elimination. I'm assuming that does not apply to you. So if you have more specific questions, I'm happy to answer those.
This was just great. I needed this answer because I've been jumping from one major to another.
Yes.
Okay, so like, did you know what you wanted to do with this degree that you got in poli-sci, undergrad degree?
No, not
Thank
even
you.
a little. No, not a clue. And my parents actually were like, you're never going to get a job with a poli-sci degree. What do you do with a poli-sci degree? I think they've finally conceded the point now that I have I'm a tenured professor. But I originally just wanted to get a degree because I was like 3 years in with nothing to show for it, except, something like 30 credits more that I needed to graduate, but none in the right places that I needed to graduate. And so initially I was just like, whatever, I'll just get a degree and then I'll figure it out. But then I took, I was in poli-sci and, you're in poli-sci for, a week and everybody's like, I want to go to law school, especially at
Yes.
Michigan, right? It's actually less bad here at Michigan. I think everybody wanted to go to law school. When I was in grad school at Emory, all the undergrads wanted to become consultants. That was like, I still don't exactly know what consultants do, but that's what they wanted to do. So I was like, well, maybe I'll go to law school. I was actually working at a law firm, not because I had any interest in being a lawyer, but because I had been working at Starbucks and my hours were bad and the pay was pretty low. And then this law firm job had like consistent daytime hours. So I didn't have to work till 2 a.m. or work at 6 a.m., both of which were great. And they paid me $9 an hour, which in Michigan at the time was considerably over minimum wage, which was $5.15. I think I was making $6.50 at Starbucks. So it was like a huge raise. But so then I was like, well, I work at a law firm. I'll become a lawyer. The attorneys I worked for were like, don't become a lawyer. Whatever you do, don't become a lawyer. They're like, it's a bad deal. They're like, we were in law school in the 90s. It was a whole different world back then, but it's too expensive. Don't become a lawyer. But I took the LSAT anyway. I didn't do very well. And then I decided, I guess, that I was going to apply to grad school because I had it's a combination of 2 things. The one is one of the classes I ended up taking just to complete the degree, and only because it met at night. And I was working, I think I worked 12 to 5 at my law firm job. So that really like cut out most of the day. I could only take early classes or night classes. Was a class on international finance. And I thought it was really interesting, but I also thought the professor was very scary. And I remember sitting in the first week of class and looking around, and my recollection is, because it was like a senior seminar, that it was like 20 male econ majors and me. I don't think that's actually how it was, but that's my recollection of it. And I was convinced I was going to fail because it was also like very hard. And the professor had this way of looking at you that was like, that is the dumbest thing anyone has ever said. Like every time I spoke, it was like, oh no. but I couldn't drop the class because I wouldn't graduate. So I started going to his office hours a lot. And it turns out he was less scary than I thought. And so he was kind of like, hey, have you considered getting a PhD? And I didn't know what that meant. And I had like no idea what professors did. And he just sort of very kindly and slowly walked me through the process. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I started working on a research project with him. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And so it was that process. And then talking to some other professors where I was like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll apply to grad school and get a PhD. It doesn't help things that I graduated from college in 2010, which was really right in the midst of the last major recession. And so I tried to apply for jobs when I graduated and I didn't get anything. Like the only jobs, I think I got a job at Jimmy John's in addition to my law firm job, but like there were no like, there just simply were no jobs that like you could support yourself on. I mean, I supported myself fine between the law school and the Jimmy John's thing, but not like, there were no career jobs open. So that's kind of, that's how I did. It was again, sort of a process of elimination thing, but no, when I decided to become a poli-sci major, I had no idea what I was going to do.
Well, I did appreciate you bringing up the law school
Mhm.
thing because every single person keeps saying that to me.
Yeah.
So I actually needed some advice from you. Do you
Yeah.
think it's worth it to get a poli-sci degree if I have no intention in working like for congressman or anything with that?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. One thing I think that political science as a discipline, not just this department, but like as a whole field, one thing I think we're pretty bad at is explaining the skills you actually learn in our classes and how it's applicable. So I think people look at poli-sci and are like, well, I'm going to learn things about courts, or I'm going to learn things about war, or I'm going to learn things about Congress, and that's going to allow me to work in courts or war or Congress or whatever. Which I mean, might be true, right? Certainly. I've had lots of students who've gone into like governmental jobs and stuff or gone to law school. But I think a lot of what you learn with a poli-sci degree is sort of a very social science analytic mindset that is applicable to a lot of positions and a lot of careers that sort of require you to observe the world and then sort of like make sense of it and figure out what might be wrong and what might go better, if that makes sense. So it's like, I mean, it varies based on sort of the combination of classes you take, but like a lot of what you learn in poli-sci classes is about like ways things have been bad, ways people have tried to make them less bad, things that have gone wrong when they tried to make them less bad, and then sort of ways to think about the world in that kind of critical way. So I often think that poli-sci is econ with people in it, instead of like, you know, animated characters with, not to be mean to econ. I was going to say some of my closest friends are economists, but they're not true. I don't have, I know some economists, they're fine, but like, but I think those are the things you learn in poli-sci. So like I'm thinking about the students that I have worked most closely with. Some of them have gone to law school, although typically because they had like a very clear thing they wanted to do in law. So I've sent a couple students, or not that I've sent, but like a handful of students that I've worked with closely have like really wanted to do immigration law or really wanted to do agricultural law. And so they've gone to law school to do that. Some of the other students that I've worked with, though, maybe most of them have gone into more like social services kinds of roles. So I had a student who for a while was working on sort of like policy work dealing with people who were unhoused, sort of like social service kind of roles.
Oh, oh, now this makes sense. Because I actually had this, stereotype that whoever majors in political science would either be a political scientist and go to grad school or just be a lawyer.
Yeah. No, and I mean, the majority don't do those things. I actually have like, so I have a wall in my office where I don't want to make it sound like I get a lot of thank you cards, but I get some thank you cards from students from time to time and I tape them up on the wall, which happens to be what my laptop faces. And so I'm like looking at them, trying to think about what some of these students are up to. And I'd say it's like maybe half of them are in law school. One of them's getting an econ PhD now, but like the majority of them, if I think just like broadly of students I've worked with, don't do either of those things. But a lot of them do end up in sort of, not necessarily civil servant, but like they end up in jobs where they are really focused on trying to improve policy in some way, whether that's actually working through the government or working more like with people or working with like lobbying organizations or stuff like that.
What a relief this answer is.
Yeah. It's also worth noting I've never had a real career outside of this. I've had a number of jobs, but I've never done any of those things, but just sort of thinking descriptively.
So like, if you could like go back to college now and like do it again, undergrad, poli sci, and you have this chance to minor in something. Do you know
Yeah.
what your minor is?
So I've actually thought about this kind of recently. I don't remember why. I actually think, and this is not applicable to pretty much anyone, but I actually think I would have gotten some kind of like a degree in like anatomy or something medical as a minor, only because I feel like it's a good life skill. And I find myself now, I'm in my mid-30s dealing with, random medical stuff. And I'm always like, it'd be really nice if I had some understanding of how the human body worked. But not for professional reasons. I just kind of like taken an anatomy class at some point. For like professional sort of like, I don't know. I wish I would have taken more classes that I thought were really fun and interesting. I didn't get to do a whole lot of that because I was in engineering and they had really strict rules on what you could take. And then I was in math and, I was always catching up with requirements. So there are a ton of classes that were offered that I wanted to take that I was never able to take just because there wasn't enough time. But I don't know if there's like a specific minor I would have taken for more like professional reasons, but I do wish I had sort of spent more time embracing the liberal artsness of liberal arts and sort of taking more fun and interesting things. I did take a lot of weird stuff, just because I was always in different, different programs. And so like I took creative writing, argumentative writing, and technical writing, all for different reasons.
Wow.
I took 2 semesters of German. I took 2 semesters of Hindi. I don't speak either of them. But I took German because I needed to fulfill a language requirement and I had taken German in high school. And I took Hindi because I was like, I'm never going to have a chance to do this again. And it was fewer credits than Arabic. Arabic was a lot of credits. I just really wanted to do something that didn't use like the Latin alphabet. That was really there was no actual reason. Like I got into this Hindi class and the professor's like, why are you here? And every other student is like, I want to write letters to my grandparents. And I was like, I've read some Salman Rushdie novels and this seems fine. Which was not a great reason, but it was kind of entertaining. But yeah, I mean, I wish I had I wish I had taken more interesting stuff and learned more about the world. You only have so many chances to do that, and I feel like I passed on that. I think now about like auditing classes in other departments just for fun, but apparently I'm not actually allowed to do that because I just asked and they said no. So
I think this answer will make me reconsider my schedule for the next fall semester. Like fun fact, I speak Arabic.
I'm sorry, what did you say? That just cut out?
I speak Arabic. Fun
Okay.
fact.
Yeah.
So like I have this question. I didn't know whom to ask. Do you know like the biggest difference between global studies and political science as a major?
I don't. I do know that one of the classes I teach counts for both.
Oh,
And for some reason, I supervised a directed study of someone's capstone in global studies that I'm not totally sure how that happened or why it was permissible, but apparently it was. But no, I know that I think global studies this may or may not be right. I understand that global studies requires a language and poli-sci does not. And otherwise, I don't know what the differences are. I barely know what the requirements are for poli-sci, to be perfectly honest.
Thank you. Those were my questions.
Yeah, sorry. I always feel bad when students come in for office hours and they ask me questions about requirements and I'm like, I have no idea. There's
Sure.
literally no idea.
Josie's down the hall. I
Yeah.
actually have a question.
Yeah.
Being like getting to the point where you are now,
Mhm.
looking back at, your undergrad and then grad school, is there any course or any, I guess, anything that you felt would have better prepared you in either one of those corridors, like class and course wise? Like
Yeah.
within poli-sci, do you feel like we need to create like a class that specifically talks about this, or is there like a gap? Would you
Okay.
access a gap?
Those are
and
two
like,
very different questions. Personally,
yeah.
I wish I would have learned more language, like actually learned one language in more depth or learned more languages. I think that would have helped me. But I'm now 800 and something days into Duolingo, so I'm making up what I can. I mean, right, so I'm not biased here. I think I am biased here. I think the department should offer more quantitative analysis courses to undergrads. I think especially as far as thinking about jobs, and I know career readiness is a controversial thing, but I think I do think that it provides students with sort of the best skill set to go out and have a lot of options for jobs, but also it's something that they can very easily articulate. Like, this is a thing I learned. Here's a thing I couldn't do and I can do. And like, it's just like a very like easy thing. But I also think that the quantitative classes provide a different framework for thinking about the world that is really helpful for students. I mean, by the same token, I often tell students they should take a computer programming class for no particular like career-oriented reason, just that basic courses in computer programming teach you about algorithms, which teach you how to think. And I think that that's a thing we don't, I mean, not how to think in the like dogmatic sense. I feel like when we say, oh, we teach people how to think, but like it teaches you a really interesting way to approach problems. And so I actually in engineering school had to take an intro to programming class, and we learned C++ and MATLAB, which is not what they teach in intro classes anymore because that was 15 odd years ago. But that, I think, more than anything, changed the way that I think about problem solving, because it gives you a very, very clear way to like sit down and articulate like what are the aspects of the problem, what needs to be done to solve the problem, and then how to go about doing it. And in programming classes, they teach you how to do that through a programming language, but it's a logic that translates into a lot of life. But yeah, no, I think I have a lot of opinions about undergrad classes and what we should offer and what we shouldn't offer, but I think everybody should take James Hollier's Thinking Strategically class. I think that's a very similar, it's a very similar sort of way of breaking down the world and thinking about problems and thinking about processes and thinking about the world that you don't get in a lot of other places. But yeah, I mean, if I could sit down and write the undergrad curriculum, it would look quite different from how it looks. But that's not a decision I get to make. So.
You might have answered this when we had someone come in,
Mhm.
but given, or if you hadn't graduated during the recession like you did, and didn't go to grad school,
Yeah.
do you know did you have, I guess, any sort of direction or inkling after undergrad to potentially go where you would go career-wise?
Yeah,
It
I was applying for jobs in public radio. That was what I wanted to do. I mean, it's not all that different from what I do now, except people would read the things I write, but it was like, and I had no background in journalism, but I really liked the idea of and this was when podcasts were like just becoming a thing before everyone had a podcast. I really liked the idea of being able to take difficult concepts and make them more accessible to people through audio formats. So I thought that would be something that was really interesting to me. For a while, I considered becoming a high school government teacher. But I think I've always been kind of motivated by the idea of, again, like taking things that seem hard and making them seem easier. So I think that's probably what I would have done.
Would you like to start a podcast?
No, no, I don't have podcast voice. And frankly, I've got nothing to say. Nothing to say that 15 other people aren't saying at any given point.
Well, I guess that's true of all podcasts, so.
That's true. There are way too many podcasts. And I listen to so many of them. But yeah, I think if I could do it all over again, I probably would have become a physical therapist, though. I was thinking about this recently. I had no idea physical therapy was a thing because I wasn't like a high school athlete when I was growing up. Like you never went to PT unless you were an athlete who got hurt. But I've been in PT a bunch in the last 10 years, and my 5-year-old is currently in PT. And it's like, wow, that is such a good way to help people. Like they do actual, real, like direct helping of people. So
It's never too late. But
no, I also think about
that.
that a lot.
Yeah.
I can always tell when I'm nearing the end of a big project because I start thinking, maybe I should just stop this and do something else with my life. Maybe I should become a dentist. So that's always
Don't
the
do
sign. No, but that's always the sign that I'm like getting tired of a project, which means I'm like really close to being done with it, is when I'm like, rabbinical school. Like, that's always how it works. So
I have a question.
yeah.
So if you could give one book recommendation to undergrad poli-sci students, what would that be?
Oof, like a poli-sci book or a more general book, or what do you have in mind?
Either one, like poli-sci or just a general one.
Ooh. Oh, that's a good question. There are so many books. So I think that my first instinct is there's this book called Burnout. And I forget who wrote it. Her last name is Nagoski, but there are two sisters named Nagoski who both write, and I don't remember which Nagoski it is. But it's fundamentally a book about dealing with frustration and like learning to do difficult things and not burning out. And I've actually excerpted part of, is that the word? I've taken part of it and put it in slides for one of my undergrad classes where I try to teach students how to have how to not have a fixed mentality. Because a lot of students approach learning things in a way where like if they get something wrong or they get a bad grade, they just sort of assume they're bad at it and they stop. And I think this is something lots of people do. It's very common, but I think especially coming out of high school, where like middle school, high school tend to be, depending on where you go to school, but like most schools tend to be very focused on like, you learn a thing, you take a test, you move on. You learn a thing, you take a test, you move on. And it really creates this mindset because you never really revisit things where you're like, oh, I got a C on that. I'm not good at that. And so by the time students get into 3085, which is the I forget what it's called, but it's the undergraduate quantitative course that I teach. It's like quantitative analysis in political science or something. I have so many students who just say, well, I'm not a math person. I'm not a computer person. Is this going to be miserable? Am I going to fail? And like, the thing that I most often find myself, like the hardest part of teaching that class is not teaching the stats. It's teaching students that they are capable of things that they have long since thought they weren't capable of doing. And so the book Burnout, and I'm sure there are many other books in the genre, that's just the one that I'm like thinking about, focuses on, it focuses specifically on burnout, but there's like this whole chapter where they talk about how your expectations of how things are supposed to go, like, is this supposed to be easy? Is this supposed to be hard? How it actually goes, like takes that expectation and then can sort of like mess up your brain, in the sense that like, if everything's always been kind of easy for you, and then you try something hard and it's really hard, it's like very difficult for you to sort of reconcile that. And so it talks a lot about sort of setting appropriate expectations and handling frustration. And so I think like if there's one thing that I would really like all poli-sci students to do, it would be to learn how to handle frustration better, but to also have a more open mind about what they can and cannot do. Just because that's the biggest problem that I see is students who are just, I've never been good at math. I've never been good at computers. I was great at math in high school. And then I got to college and I suddenly was awful at math. And I took multivariate calculus my first semester of college, and it was awful.
Mhm.
Like that nightmare of going into the exam and looking at it and being like, I don't know any of this, was my lived experience of that class. And I tried too. But that definitely made me think, even after, I was one of the lucky few who had like constant positive reinforcement about my math skills. It only took that one class to completely undo, 12 years of schooling in which I was always an A student in math. Like it was one class, it was probably just like the first exam. And I was like, oh no, I am actually very bad at this. And I kind of wish that I had what we call a growth mentality, which basically encourages you to look at, when things go badly or when you get something wrong, to look at it as feedback instead of some kind of an indictment of your skills. So like I said, the book Burnout deals with that. There are also books about fixed mentality and growth mentality. I haven't read any recently, but actually that is probably what I would suggest, which is, I think, probably not what you were anticipating. I'm trying to think of like a good poli-sci book I could recommend, but like the mindset thing's really important.
Thank you. That was a great answer because I've been suffering from this fixed mentality.
Yeah, it's super common. I'm writing a textbook about the programming language R. And there's a whole chapter that I'm writing right now, which is just basically like why getting errors while programming doesn't mean you're stupid and bad at this. Because so many students that I teach, and I've taught 3085 most semesters since 2016. This is the first semester since the spring of 2020. I have not taught it. Which actually means it's the first semester since my youngest was born that I have not taught it, for further context. But I mean, that is most students that I teach. Just it's very hard to handle getting things wrong because you're here because you've mostly gotten things right. Right. That's sort of like the weird paradox of a university education is like, to get in, you have to have mostly done things right throughout your life. But then if you're actually challenging yourself, you're going to start getting things wrong. And that's very difficult to deal with. And I coped very badly with that in college. So if like there's one thing that I could accomplish in my career, if I can just convince a sufficient number of students that like getting things wrong doesn't mean that you're dumb, and it doesn't mean you're bad, and it doesn't mean that like all of your past experiences are wrong. Like I remember in college failing out of like I did very badly in almost everything, and then I failed one class. And I just remember being like, everyone at home is going to be so disappointed at me because all I've ever been is a high GPA. All people ever saw in me was like the A student, the valedictorian. And all of a sudden I'm like a C student at best. And like, I remember it just being incredibly damaging to because like my self-image was entirely my GPA. And then I went to college and all of a sudden, especially at Michigan where it's like, it's probably true here as well, but at Michigan, it's like, oh, everyone was the valedictorian and all of you went to better high schools than me. But it was like, I mean, I can laugh about it now, but it was incredibly damaging. And so that's sort of if that is, I think, the number one thing that I think is most important for like, if this textbook I write and this chapter can convince enough people that like errors in programming don't mean you're bad or wrong or can't learn programming, it just means the computer is basically saying, say that again. I will have succeeded in my professional life. So
Um, I'm sure you might have been asked this question before, but I was wondering if you could take one CLA class now, what would that class be?
I don't look a lot at the course catalog, so I don't exactly know what other courses are offered. I will say that when I wait in the elevators in the social sciences building, sociology does a great job of naming their classes and putting a bunch of signs up for them, and all of them sound fascinating. But personally, I think I would probably take a contemporary lit class, like literature since 1945 or something like that. If I'm sure such a class exists. But just because I read a lot of fiction and I would, love to conscript someone into talking about it with me. And have a framework for thinking about it, that'd be useful.
Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, I had this like thought that poli-sci professors don't read fiction.
Oh, I read so much fiction. So right now, actually, while I was eating lunch, hold on. I have to say, a lot of the political scientists I know are what you describe. And I ask, people talk about what they're reading and they're like, I'm reading this great poli-sci book. I'm reading this sort of young adult lit book. Gabrielle Zevin is one of my favorite authors right now. And this is basically a book about a girl that is in a cycling accident when she's 15. She's riding her bike, she gets hit by a car and she dies. And it's a whole retelling of what the afterlife is like. So no, I read a lot of fiction and it's not even like high literary fiction. So, I also have books like, like this that I read, but mostly for work. So
Who's your favorite author, like fiction author?
other than Gabrielle Zevin, let's see. I really like Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think that's kind of she's pretty popular, so I think that's kind of a cliched answer. Oh geez, who else? I go through these phases where I'll just read everything written by a specific person. So right now I'm doing that for Gabrielle Zevin because I read her most recent book, which I forget the name of, but it's about video game designers, and it's cool. Who are some other authors I really like? Yeah, I would say right now Gabrielle Zevin and Taylor Jenkins Reid for fiction. And then for nonfiction, I really like Mark Oppenheimer. And what's his name? Michael Lewis is very good. That's a pretty cliched answer because I'm a political economist and he's written a whole lot about financial crises, but he writes very accessibly, which I think is important. I'm sure there are others, but those are the ones who immediately come to mind.
Do you have like a favorite poet?
Favorite poet. I was very into Sylvia Plath in high school in a very cliched high school way.
I love her.
I don't read a lot of poetry anymore. Although a friend of mine from high school is now I guess, fairly established poet. His name is Perry Janes. And also another guy I went to high school with. And I'm from like a pretty mediocre Detroit suburb. I didn't go to a great high school, but this other guy I went to high school with is like pretty well known in the New York poetry scene. And there was a New Yorker article about him a few years ago that I was reading and I was like, oh, that's weird. Alex Dimitrov. I went to high school with a guy named Alex Dimitrov. That doesn't seem like a super common name. And then there's a picture of him and I was like, yep, that's Alex Dimitrov. He looks basically the same as he did when he was 18. But yeah, I don't read a whole lot of poetry anymore.
Going back just for a second to
Yeah.
the discussion on burnout and
Yeah.
failure, do you feel that you not succeeding or your non-successes in undergraduate prepared you for graduate school?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I think I think that, so I had a very, very unpleasant undergraduate experience, but I think that it made me a lot more resilient. It also sort of reset my baseline expectation of my own successes in life. So coming out of high school, like I said, like I was like, I'm good at everything. I am a straight A student. And then I got to college and I was like, I'm bad at everything. Oh, wow, nothing goes right. And so I think my expectations now are like, I'm very hard to disappoint now. But I think it made me take things for granted less, and it made me more resilient. And I think it definitely helped me deal with feedback in a better way, because in a lot of ways, all of my failures sort of remade me. And my sense of self was no longer tied up in being successful. And once it was no longer so personally, like existentially important for me to like be smart or well-spoken or, or successful or all of those things, like suddenly I could just be a person and I wasn't laden by all of those labels. And so if things don't go well, like that sucks, but also it is not a threat to who I am as a person, which I think is good. If you're too tied up in being like a person that other people see as being successful, I think it can be much harder for you to not have things go well. And like in academia, we submit papers, most of the time they get rejected. Even when they don't get rejected, sometimes you get really nasty feedback. And I think it's much easier for me to deal with that than it is for other people, because I just don't really take it as like a blow to who I am as a person. Like I'm not too invested in like, my professional success. I'm not too like tied up in prestige, because that doesn't, in my mind anymore, reflect on who I am as a person. Whereas in undergrad or like in high school, for instance, prestige and success were like who I thought I was. And so like there were colleges and universities I didn't even apply to because I was kind of a snob about it. Like I have a friend who's at Michigan State now, he's a professor there. And I was reflecting that like I didn't even apply to Michigan State because I was like, oh, that's below me. And I probably I probably would not have had a really good experience at Michigan State, because Michigan State is very football and parties and I am not very football and parties, but like there are probably lots of places where I probably would have been happier if I had been more accepting of the fact that like the prestige, like it didn't matter so much if people thought I was a success. But in high school, that's kind of all I had. I think about this a lot because I'm trying to make sure my kids don't end up like I was. So.
That's my concern now, and going back and forth on whether or not I want to apply and potentially do a PhD. Whether I can submit myself to being told no and being told that I'm not good enough and that it sucks like repeatedly for 5-6 years.
I mean, that's
Like,
what I tell the prospective grad students when they're looking at like what program to go to. It's like when you meet with people who might be your advisor, like think about how you would feel with this person telling you you're wrong for 5 to 7 years, because that's what you're signing up for. And like some people do it in ways that will work for you, and some people do it in ways that will not work for you. And, but yeah, it's hard to separate the work from yourself, I think, in academia. It's like, I like to tell my grad students a lot, like, you are not a brain in a jar. Like, you are a body and a person, and like, you should cultivate external hobbies and stuff. So like, in a sense, you need to like diversify your self-worth, because like work will not always be going well. And if work is the entirety of yourself, when it doesn't go well, then you're not going well. It's like in grad school, I got really into running marathons, because if work sucked, then like running was probably fine. And if running was bad, maybe work was fine. Just like the joint probability that everything you do is going to be bad at once is not 0, but it's lower than the probability any individual thing will go bad. So I don't know if I'd recommend anyone get a PhD. What do you want to get a PhD in?
Industrial organizational psychology.
Ooh, that's fun.
I hope so. I mean, the idea is to help organizations in their hiring practices. But yeah, it's, yeah, the thought of, well, one, the thought of just doing research for the rest of my life is not ideal. Which is why I didn't go to grad school after I finished my undergrad in sociology. Because it was just like, I don't want to write papers for the rest of my life. Like, I'm okay with doing the research and I like gathering the knowledge, but
Yeah.
being pretentious and pompous and writing up the knowledge for only the people in the field to read it was just like, it's not a good idea to me, or it doesn't sound like fun, and it doesn't sound like something that I would want to spend the rest of my life doing.
No.
But I was and still am drawn to the idea of teaching, like being a professor and engaging with different people who think differently and who will constantly like sharpen me and get me to think of things in different ways and not to just get stuck in my own perception of something.
Yeah.
Like that constant interaction, like I would love that to be like, oh, you just taught me something that I had never thought of. And it's because, I'm 40 at the time, or, sometime in the future, and this little 20-something-year-old sitting in my class, like throw something at me that I've like never heard before. And it's just like, world expanding. And
Oh,
so
it happens to me all the time.
yeah, and
Great.
like being just reflecting on my undergrad, and I was pre-med and then I took org chem, and it was just like, this is not the track for me.
No.
And so and then being in a sociology class and just having interactions with my professors and being like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And it just kind of like changing your perspective, just like giving you a paradigm shift that just kind of changes your world over and sets you on a new path. And so like, I want to help other people experience that. And so that's kind of the draw there. But it's just like, I don't want to teach at like a junior college or like a non-R1 or research like heavy school. But then at the same time, it's just like, I don't want to have all my time and focus on research and being like, I have to get tenure, I have to do all this, and then take me away from actually teaching and engaging with the students how I want to. So it's a balance, and I'm just like, I don't know how, or if I ever will actually reconcile it. But
I mean, there are some universities that are starting to have tenure track teaching positions. So I know Michigan has long had that. So they have people who are in tenure track lecturer jobs, and you can be an assistant, associate, or full lecturer. And I don't know if they don't do research, or if the research expectations are lower, but like the best physics professor I had was a lecturer, but their lecturers are not adjunct. And I think University of Toronto has something similar, because I had a student who was interested in those kinds of jobs for a while, so I was looking at them, but they're still not super common. You have to say, writing articles nobody will ever read is not the.
It's just like, and it's so time consuming. You put so much work and so much effort into it. And it's like, great, you learned all these things and you have this new wealth of knowledge. But yeah, it's just like, no one is going to read it. And then the people who do read it are like hypercritical and being like, I don't agree with that, and that's wrong, and that's wrong. And it's just like, am I really, adding to academia in this sense, or am I just like regurgitating old information? Like what I'm like you, I'm not really focused on the legacy part of it, but I feel like if I put in all that work, that like I will want something from it. Then other people like, oh, this research was flawed, your study was like, you didn't do this, or you forgot to look at this. And so and it's just like, what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, it's at some point I feel like I had kind of a mindset shift about producing research, where I just sort of like started realizing nobody was going to read it, and I started putting in fun footnotes for myself. And like I wrote a book, came out last year. It has been purchased fewer than 100 times. I know that because I just got my $88 royalty check. So, really raking in the big bucks here. Although honestly, I'm just like, $88 I did nothing for. This is great. I love this. Please, in perpetuity, I would love getting like a $10 check that I don't expect every year. That sounds amazing. But like, yeah, I just put in a bunch of footnotes that were just for my own sort of fun.
You
So,
just need a peer at a peer institution to make your book a required book in their class. Yeah.
yeah, that's maybe someday, I don't know. But even then, like I was at a conference a few weeks ago and I actually was in the weird position of like having to tell someone like, oh, actually, like the thing you're working on, like my book speaks like directly to that. But that felt kind of gross. So then I was like,
Yeah.
if you email me, I'll just send you the PDF. This is not me trying to sell something. Like, let me just give you page proofs. It's fine. Like, don't go, like, they're like 100 books, like $100 or something. Please don't. So,
Well, that brings us to about time. Does
All right.
anyone have any last minute questions?
Not a last minute question, but I wanted to say thank you very much for your time.
yeah,
This
thanks
was
for
like
showing
an
up.
inspiring event. Thank you.
Feel free to send me an email whenever I'm around.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, with that, I guess that concludes our Faculty Friday.
right.
Thanks everyone for showing up and participating, and thank you, Jane, for answering all of our questions.
Yeah, no worries. I'll see you in 10 minutes when I come refill my water bottle.
All right. Yep.
Yes, thank
Have a good
you.
one.